Welcome to Chronicle Stories TV. Before we begin, please drop a like and subscribe. The lake didn't even have a name on the map. Just a stretch of cold blue tucked into the thick green woods north of town. Locals called it Dead Echo Lake, but only in whispers, and only after a few drinks. George had heard the name growing up, but never thought twice about it. Now, at 24, he found himself staring at its still surface with a strange unease. "Looks peaceful," Alex muttered, tossing a rock that skipped once, twice, then vanished without a splash. Caden, always the quiet one, stood a little back from the shore, eyes scanning the water's edge. "Something's off about this place," he said. George laughed, but it came out forced. "You guys sound like old men. We came here to chill, not spook ourselves out." They'd all agreed to camp for the weekend. No phones. No distractions. Just fishing, a few beers, and a break from life. The three of them had been inseparable since middle school, and even now, they trusted each other with the kind of silent loyalty that only childhood friends carry into adulthood. But there was something about the lake. The water didn't move, even with the breeze. No bugs skimmed its surface. No birds chirped nearby. The silence was too clean. They set up camp about 30 feet from the shoreline. The trees formed a tight semicircle around them, leaving only the dark water and the gray sky above. As dusk fell, the woods grew quieter. The fire crackled. Marshmallows burned. But none of them laughed much. Caden broke the silence. "Did you hear that?" George raised an eyebrow. "Hear what?" Splash. Out there. Caden pointed to the far end of the lake, where mist had begun to rise off the water. "Probably a fish," Alex said quickly. Too quickly. They all stared. Nothing moved. George exhaled and stood up. "I'll check it out in the morning. For now, let's just relax." No more ghost stories. But none of them spoke again for a while. Not until the fire burned low. And even then, no one mentioned the pale shape that had surfaced, just for a moment, in the center of the lake. Just a shape. No eyes. No face. Just watching. That night, the woods pressed in closer. The trees creaked softly, like they were breathing. The three friends zipped up their tents, the fire reduced to glowing coals. George lay on his back in the dark, the nylon fabric of his tent lightly rustling as the wind passed. He couldn't sleep. His eyes stared upward, though there was nothing to see. Only the faint shape of the tent ceiling, and the occasional flicker of light from the embers outside. Then came the sound. Not loud, but unmistakable. A splash. Not a soft one. Something heavy entering the water. Then silence. George sat up slowly, listening. His breath felt tight in his chest. He fumbled for the zipper but stopped when he heard a low ripple, closer this time. Like something was swimming, just offshore. He told himself it had to be a beaver or maybe a deer, but the water here was deep. Too deep for animals to wade. From the next tent over, Alex called out softly, "George." "Yeah," George whispered back. "You heard that too?" "Yeah." Neither of them moved. Neither of them dared. Caden didn't say anything, but George knew he was awake too. The silence between them stretched, filled only by the soft lapping of water and the wind brushing the treetops. Then, another sound. This time from the shoreline. Wet. Like something dragging itself from the water. Thud. A faint, wet step. Then another. And another. It stopped. Right outside Caden's tent. No one moved. Not even Caden. George held his breath, straining to hear anything else. The soft rhythm of steps had stopped, but the tension in the air felt unbearable, like the night was holding its breath too. Then came a faint scraping sound, fabric against something sharp, like claws dragging across Caden's tent. "Guys," Caden whispered. His voice was low, but it trembled. "It's right outside." George's fingers closed around the flashlight by his side. He didn't turn it on. Just gripped it tightly, like it could protect him somehow. "Don't move," Alex whispered. "Don't even breathe." They waited. Seconds passed. Maybe minutes. Then, something shifted again. A slow dragging sound, like something returning to the water. Heavy. Wet. Sluggish. Leaves crackled. A stick snapped. And then, silence. The kind of silence that made the world feel empty. George didn't move for another 10 minutes. When he finally unzipped his tent and peeked out, the moonlight was gone. Only a low, dull gray hung over the campsite. Everything looked untouched. But Caden's tent had 4 long slashes across the rainfly, deep, even, and wet. "We need to leave," Caden said, emerging pale and tense. "First thing in the morning." Alex nodded. Agreed. Something's not right here. But George hesitated. He looked toward the lake. There, just offshore, the water rippled, once. As if something had just slipped beneath the surface. And the mist was thicker than before. Morning arrived, gray and cold. The air smelled like copper, and the mist hadn't lifted from the lake. It clung to the trees like something alive, thick and curling around their trunks. None of the 3 had really slept. George had stayed up most of the night, watching the shoreline, waiting to hear that dragging sound again. But nothing came. Alex was already packing up when George stepped out of his tent. His hands shook slightly, though he tried to hide it. "I'm not staying another night here," he muttered, jamming his sleeping bag into its stuffed sack. Caden stood at the water's edge, staring out. "What are you doing?" George asked him. "There's something under there," Caden said quietly. "I know you both saw it. Or at least, felt it." George didn't respond right away. He looked at the lake. Still motionless. The surface looked like glass stretched thin, reflecting nothing, hiding everything. Alex zipped his backpack. "Let's just get out of here. Now." But their car was parked about 2 hours back through the woods, and the narrow trail they'd taken had become soft and muddy from last night's damp air. Still, they walked in silence, packs on their backs, not even speaking as the woods swallowed them again. After about 30 minutes, George stopped. "Guys, where's the orange marker?" Alex turned. "What do you mean?" "There should be a tree marked with orange tape here. I put it up yesterday. It was our halfway point." Caden walked ahead a few paces, scanning the trunks. "There's nothing." They were off the trail. Somehow, they had taken a wrong turn. Or something had moved the markers. The forest around them was denser than before. The path, if there had ever been one, was now tangled with brambles and overgrown roots. The air felt heavier. "I swear this is where we came through," George said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Backtrack," Alex said. "We'll find the right way. Let's not panic." But they were already panicking. All of them. And behind them, far in the distance, the sound of water lapping at a shore. They retraced their steps, boots thudding softly against the damp soil. But the woods didn't look familiar. The tall pine trees seemed to press closer, darker than before, and the deeper they walked, the more the air began to smell like rotten algae. "I think the lake's pulling us back," Caden said, almost to himself. "What?" George snapped, frustrated. "I mean, it's like we're circling. Everything's too quiet. No birds, no wind. Nothing moves. Like we're inside a loop." Alex stopped. "Okay, stop. That's not helping." But then he looked down. All three of them did. Their boot prints, muddy, fresh, were in front of them. Not behind. Like they'd already been this way. George's voice was hollow. This doesn't make any sense. Let's just go downhill, Alex said, trying to force logic into the moment. Water always pools downhill. That should take us away from the lake, not toward it. But when they finally broke through a line of trees, the woods opened, back into the clearing. Their campsite. Exactly as they'd left it. The slash tent. The cold ashes of the fire. The lake, still waiting, silent. George dropped his bag. That's not possible. No, Caden whispered. It's doing this. It wants us here. As if to answer him, the lake rippled. Just once. Like it heard him. The mist crept a little closer. That night, they didn't sleep. Not because they were scared, but because something moved outside their tents. Pacing. Waiting. Not bothering to hide anymore. They sat around the newly built fire, close together this time. No one made jokes. No one roasted marshmallows. The crackle of flames was the only sound, its flickering light barely keeping the shadows at bay. George glanced at the lake every few seconds. He couldn't help it. Something in him felt drawn to it, like a string was tied between his chest and that dark, unmoving water. Alex was whittling a stick with his pocket knife, more out of nerves than purpose. We have to figure something out, he said, eyes locked on the point of the blade. We can't keep circling back. There has to be a way out. Caden didn't answer. He hadn't spoken much since they'd returned to the clearing. George leaned forward, voice low. Do either of you remember hearing about this place before? Alex shook his head. No. Just that it was out here. A quiet spot. It wasn't even on my phone's GPS when we arrived. I heard something, Caden said finally. Back in town, years ago. Some guy at the gas station said not to come out this far. Called it a cursed body. Said it pulls people under. Said the water was hungry. Alex scoffed, but it sounded weak. Stories. That's just campfire stuff. Is it? Caden asked. The fire popped. Then something on the far side of the lake let out a low, warbling groan. Long and distant, like the cry of a whale, but wet and wrong. All three of them froze. The sound died off slowly, like it had sunk back beneath the surface. Alex stood up, turning in a circle. Nope. I'm done. I don't care how dark it is. I'm not waiting out here for whatever that is. George grabbed his arm. You want to walk blind through woods that already looped us back once? I'd rather die trying than wait to be dragged off in my sleep. But they didn't leave. Not yet. Because the mist had crept in too close now. It hugged the trunks. Clung to the ground. And in it were footprints. Wet. Bare. Walking up from the water. They stood in stunned silence, watching as the damp footprints slowly pressed deeper into the soil. The fog shifted with each step, as if something was walking toward them, even though they couldn't see it. Back away from the fire, George whispered. Don't make a sound. The prints stopped about 20 feet from them. Then a new set began. Right beside the first. Then another. Caden's voice was paper-thin. There's more than one. Shapes moved in the mist. Only outlines. Tall. Slumped. Dripping. Faces hidden in shadow, limbs moving too slowly, too deliberately. George's mind screamed to run, but his legs were stone. Alex stepped back into the firelight, raising his knife like it would do anything. Don't come any closer, he shouted. The shapes didn't stop. George turned toward the tents. Get inside. Zip up. Lights off. Are you kidding me? Alex barked. Do it. Caden yelled. They scrambled into their tents and zipped up the doors, leaving the firelight behind. George huddled in the dark, barely breathing. Outside, the sounds returned. Footsteps in the leaves. Sloshing water. And then, something scraping slowly around the fabric of his tent. Dragging across it. Circling. A whisper, so soft it felt like it came from inside his head. Still water runs deep. Then silence. Until the fire went out. The fire was gone, snuffed out, smothered by the heavy mist that had rolled in. Darkness swallowed the clearing whole, leaving only the faint sound of water lapping at the shore. Inside his tent, George's heart pounded like a drum. Every breath was shallow, every movement carefully calculated not to make a sound. He stared at the tent walls, imagining the creature just inches away, dragging its claws across the fabric, trying to find a way inside. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time slipped away in the cold, silent void. Suddenly, a soft wet sniffing noise echoed close by. George's eyes widened. Something was right outside, smelling, searching. He whispered, voice trembling, Alex. Caden. You awake? No answer. The silence thickened. Then came the wet scraping again, closer this time. Something cold touched the tent flap. George clenched his fists. Stay calm, stay calm. Suddenly, the tent shook violently, like something tried to pull it open. George lunged forward, trying to keep the zipper closed. A guttural, low growl rolled from the outside. Deep and terrible. The zipper slid a hair. George's breath caught. A shadow loomed outside, just beyond the thin fabric. It was tall, towering, with long limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Then it vanished. The night was still once more. But George knew it wasn't gone. Morning light leaked through the trees like pale fingers, weak but enough to remind them the nightmare wasn't endless. Alex was pacing near the dying embers of the fire pit, his face pale and drawn. We can't stay here another night. We have to find help, Caden said, rubbing his arms against the chill. But the trail is gone. The markers too. George knelt, inspecting the muddy ground near the tents. We need to move fast before it finds us again tonight. Alex nodded sharply. Agreed. Let's pack, and try the other side of the lake. Maybe the boat launch or the ranger station. Caden hesitated. Before we go, did either of you see the footprints again last night? George swallowed hard. More than footprints. Something was watching us. They broke camp quickly, their hands trembling as they gathered gear. As they started through the trees, a faint sound stopped them cold, the distant, echoing splash of something large entering water. All three turned toward the lake. Far away, the surface rippled, then a shape rose. Tall and thin, coated in wet moss and algae, its eyes glowing faintly in the mist. It was watching. And waiting. The three friends hurried through the tangled underbrush, their breaths sharp and shallow. Every crunch of twigs underfoot made them jump, hearts hammering like tribal drums. George led the way, eyes fixed ahead but mind swirling with memories of last night's horrors. He couldn't shake the image of that towering shadow, its glowing eyes fixed on them through the mist. Caden, George said quietly, do you really think it's alive? Or something else? Caden didn't answer immediately. His gaze drifted to the dark woods on their left. I don't know, he admitted. But whatever it is, it's been here a long time. The moss, the water, it's part of the lake now. Alex kept glancing back, paranoia growing. I don't want to think about that. I want to get out. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled faintly, like a heartbeat pulsing through the earth. Did you feel that? Alex whispered, stopping in his tracks. George nodded. Yeah. Caden's eyes narrowed. It's the lake. It's alive. The air grew colder, and the mist thickened around them like a choking fog. Ahead, through the trees, the faint outline of a broken dock appeared, rotten planks and rusted nails jutting out over the water. Maybe we can find a boat there, George suggested, quickening his pace. But as they approached, the water stirred. From the dark depths, a hand emerged, pale, slimy, and covered in weeds, gripping the dock's edge with unnatural strength. The friends froze, faces pale. The hand pulled up a second, then a third figure, a long, grotesque arm, thin and sinewy. Then, from the shadows beneath the dock, the creature rose. Its body was a twisted mockery of a man, limbs elongated and warped, skin slick and mottled like the lake bed. Its eyes, luminescent and hollow, locked on them. The creature hissed, a sound like rushing water and broken glass. George swallowed hard, gripping his knife tighter. The fight or flight instinct surged. Run! Alex shouted, breaking the trance. They sprinted back through the trees, branches whipping their faces and tearing at their clothes. Behind them, the creature crashed into the water, sending waves toward shore, chasing them with relentless speed. Caden. This way. George shouted, ducking beneath a low branch. The undergrowth thickened, slowing them, branches snagging their packs. Alex stumbled, nearly falling. The creature's splash grew louder, closer. George reached down, grabbing Alex's arm and pulling him up. We have to lose it in the woods. George yelled. Caden darted off to the right, hoping to draw the creature away. Wait! George yelled after him. But Caden disappeared into the mist. George and Alex kept running, lungs burning, until they burst into a small clearing. The sun broke through the clouds, illuminating an old cabin, its windows shattered and walls stained with moss. Inside. George urged. They threw open the door and slipped inside. The cabin smelled of damp wood and decay. Alex locked the door behind them. They pressed their backs to it, gasping for air. Outside, the splashing stopped. Only silence remained. For a moment. Then a faint tapping came from the window. Slow. Deliberate. Like the creature was telling them it wasn't done yet. George peered through the grimy window, his breath fogging the cold glass. Outside, the mist clung thick to the trees, swallowing the edges of the clearing. The tapping had stopped, but the heavy silence was almost worse, like waiting for a trap to spring. Alex pulled a splintered chair closer to the door, wedging it under the handle. We can't stay here forever, he muttered, voice tight. We need a plan. Caden sat on the cracked floorboards, head bowed, hands clasped. We need to understand what we're dealing with, he said quietly. If this thing is part of the lake, maybe it's tied to the water in some way. George nodded slowly. The water was different, wasn't it? Like it was alive, almost breathing. Alex looked up. You mean like a creature from a nightmare? Maybe, Caden said. But I think it's more than that. It's a guardian. Or a curse. Suddenly, a wet thud echoed outside. The sound of something heavy hitting the wooden walls. They all froze. Then, a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, circled the cabin. George's heart slammed against his ribs. Don't make a sound, he whispered, gripping his knife tight. Minutes stretched, filled only by the groan of the old cabin and the creature's slow, methodical scraping. Then, unexpectedly, the noise stopped. Outside, the night swallowed everything again. We can't stay here forever, Alex said again, pacing now. We have to move before it figures out how to get in. Caden nodded. There's one other thing. The stories I heard, they said the creature hates fire. George's eyes widened. You mean the fire from the lake? The campfire. Exactly, Caden said. Light and fire might be the only way to keep it at bay. Alex looked skeptical, but... Fire. Keep it burning all night. But the trail, Alex started. We'll find it, George interrupted. We have to try. They gathered what little they had, broken branches, dry leaves, even torn pieces of their shirts. Outside, the mist had started to rise again, curling through the broken windows like smoke. George lit a match, and the tiny flame flared, steady and bright. Together, they built a small fire inside the cabin's hearth. The glow pushed the shadows back, filling the room with warmth and light. For the first time since they arrived, the oppressive silence lifted slightly. But outside, in the mist, something watched. Waiting. The fire crackled softly, its warm glow filling the cabin. George sat close, staring into the dancing flames, trying to believe the flickering light could hold back the darkness that surrounded them. Outside, the mist pressed against the windows like cold fingers, but the fire seemed to create a fragile bubble of safety. Alex paced near the door, glancing nervously outside every few moments. "How long do you think it will keep away?" he asked, voice barely more than a whisper. Caden remained quiet, eyes fixed on the flames. "The stories never said how long," he said. "Just that it hates fire and light." George frowned. "We don't have much wood. Once this fire dies out, what then?" A sudden sharp knock at the door made them all jump. Alex tensed, hand reaching for his knife. George held up a hand. "Wait." The knocking came again, slow, deliberate. "Who's there?" George called softly. No answer. Only the silence that followed, heavier than before. Then, a wet sound, like something sliding along the wooden porch. The fire flickered as a cold breeze swept through the cabin. Caden stood, peering through a crack in the door. His face went pale. "There's something out there," he said. "It's watching." George swallowed hard. "We can't keep running. We have to face it." Alex shook his head. "Face it? You're crazy." Caden stepped forward. "No, he's right. We need to understand it. We need to find out why it's here." The three of them sat back down near the fire, the fragile warmth their only comfort. Suddenly, George remembered something. The stories. The man at the gas station said something else, about an old well near the lake. Said the creature came from there. Alex scoffed, but Caden looked thoughtful. "An old well," he said. "Maybe it's the source. Maybe it's where it lives." They decided to wait until daylight to find the well. The night stretched on, filled with distant splashes and eerie silence. George lay awake, listening to the sounds outside, the whisper of water, the scraping in the dark. The fire burned low. And somewhere, beneath the lake, the creature waited. The dawn crept slowly through the broken windows, casting pale light on the cracked wooden floor. George stretched stiff limbs and rubbed his eyes, still heavy from restless sleep. Outside, the mist clung low, swirling like ghostly tendrils across the clearing. Alex was already awake, pacing near the door, tense and silent. Caden sat cross-legged near the fire pit, lost in thought. "We need to find that well before nightfall," George said quietly. "If that's where it came from, maybe we can stop it." Caden nodded, folding his hands. "I've heard stories passed down from old families around here, about a well that sank into the lake years ago. Some say it was cursed." Alex grimaced. "Sounds like a fairy tale." But the look in Caden's eyes told George it wasn't. They packed their few belongings, bracing themselves for the trek through the forest again. The woods were eerily silent, the usual chorus of birds and insects absent as they pushed deeper toward the lake's far shore. Every snap of twig and rustle of leaves made their hearts jump. After an hour, the trees thinned, revealing a moss-covered stone well, half submerged and cracked, tangled in roots and vines. George approached cautiously. The water inside was black and still, reflecting the gloomy sky. "Is this it?" Alex asked, voice low. Caden knelt beside the well, tracing the worn stones with his fingers. "This is where the curse started," he said. "And where it still waits." George peered into the dark water of the well, feeling an icy chill crawl up his spine. The surface was perfectly still, like a mirror hiding something beneath. Suddenly, the water rippled. Slowly at first, then with growing intensity, as if something stirred far below. A faint, guttural noise echoed from the depths, a whispering moan, low and mournful. Caden stepped back, eyes wide. "It's alive." Alex swallowed hard, gripping his knife. "We need to destroy it. Now." But George hesitated. What if destroying it only makes it worse? Caden shook his head. "We have no choice. If it's the source of this nightmare, we end it here." They searched the surrounding area and found a pile of old, cracked stones, remnants of a long-forgotten structure. George gathered the stones and hefted them into the well, hoping to seal whatever lay beneath. But as the last stone dropped, a monstrous ripple surged up. The water exploded, splashing over the edges. A cold wind whipped through the trees, carrying a terrible, guttural roar. From the depths of the well, a pale, twisted hand shot up, fingers splayed wide. Then the hand vanished, but the warning lingered in the air. They had disturbed something ancient. Something hungry. The roar faded into a low rumble, like distant thunder echoing through the trees. George, Alex, and Caden stood frozen beside the well, hearts pounding, breath visible in the cold morning air. Caden broke the silence first. "We didn't seal it. We awakened it." George swallowed hard. "We have to get back to camp. Fast." As they turned, the forest around them seemed to close in tighter. Shadows lengthened, and the mist thickened, swirling at their feet like living smoke. Suddenly, a dark shape darted between the trees, too fast to be human. "Run!" Alex shouted. Branches whipped at their faces as they sprinted blindly through the woods, desperate to escape. Behind them, the roar returned, closer now, filled with rage and hunger. They burst back into the clearing, their breaths ragged, and slammed the cabin door shut. Inside, the fire was nearly out. George hurried to relight it, hands shaking. As the flames grew, the windows rattled violently. A shadow passed across the glass. Something was outside. Waiting. The pounding on the door came suddenly, fierce and relentless. Alex grabbed a broken chair, bracing it under the handle. "Whatever it is, it wants in," he growled. Caden moved to the window, peering through the flickering firelight. His breath hitched. There, pressed against the glass, was a face. Pale, elongated, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. No nose. Just hollow sockets. The creature's mouth opened slowly, revealing rows of jagged, waterlogged teeth. It hissed, a wet, gurgling sound that filled the cabin with icy dread. George backed away, clutching his knife. "Light!" Caden shouted. "We have to keep it lit." The fire roared higher as they threw on dry wood, the creature recoiling from the brightness. But the pounding didn't stop. It circled the cabin, scraping at the walls. Then, silence. Too heavy to be safe. George whispered, "We're trapped." Trapped inside the cabin, the three friends huddled close to the fire. The flames cast flickering shadows that danced eerily across the cracked walls, but for now, the light was their only protection. Alex wiped sweat from his brow despite the chill. "How long do you think this thing can keep circling us out there?" Caden shook his head. "I don't know, but I doubt it will give up easily. This place is its territory." George clenched his jaw. "We need to find a way out." Maybe we can use the boat launch on the other side of the lake. We haven't checked there yet. Alex frowned. Are you crazy? It's waiting outside. We'll never make it. Caden's eyes met George's. We don't have a choice. We can't stay here and wait to be picked off. The fire sputtered, the air thick with tension. Suddenly, a faint splash echoed outside. The creature was moving on the water again. George swallowed hard. We leave at first light. Stay awake. Keep the fire burning. The long, cold night passed with barely a whisper. The fire burned low but steady. Their eyes grew heavy, but Northwest One dared close them. Every creak and drip from the cabin set their nerves on edge. At dawn, the mist still hugged the lake's edge. George, Alex, and Caden packed quickly, the weight of exhaustion pressing down on them. With makeshift weapons and whatever supplies they could carry, they stepped outside. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The lake was calm again, the surface smooth as glass. But then, the silence broke. From the far shore, a low, haunting cry echoed, an unnatural sound that froze their blood. They didn't look back. They ran. Through the trees. Through the mist. Toward the boat launch. The creature's eyes glinted in the distance, watching their desperate flight. And the water waited. The boat launch was a narrow wooden dock, old and weathered, jutting out into the lake like a broken finger. The wood creaked under their feet as George, Alex, and Caden hurried to the small rowboat tied loosely to a post. George fumbled with the rope, hands trembling, finally freeing the boat. Alex climbed in first, grabbing the oars. We don't have much time, George urged, climbing in behind him. Caden stayed on shore for a moment, scanning the tree line. Then, he jumped into the boat, pulling the tarp over their heads. The water was unnervingly still as Alex began to row, muscles straining against the heavy silence. Every splash echoed too loudly. Behind them, the lake's edge seemed to ripple unnaturally, as if something large was moving just beneath the surface. George stared into the dark water, feeling eyes watching from below. The boat rocked slightly. Then, nothing. For a moment, hope flickered. But then, the water exploded with a thunderous roar. A massive shape burst from the depths, a towering figure with seaweed draped over its twisted limbs, glowing eyes fixed on the boat. Alex rowed harder, heart pounding, as the creature lunged. The creature's fingers grazed the boat's edge, splashing icy water onto their faces. Its breath was a putrid wave of decay and swamp. George grabbed an oar, swinging wildly, hitting the creature's arm with a sickening thud. The creature howled, recoil slow but deliberate. Alex gasped, rowing faster, muscles burning. Caden reached for a flare from their bag, but it slipped from his hands into the water. "No," he shouted, eyes wide. The creature's mouth opened wide, a cavernous maw dripping with black water. George braced himself. Then the creature pulled back, retreating beneath the waves with a splash that drenched the boat. They gasped for breath, hearts pounding in the sudden, fragile silence. Alex looked at George. "We can't stay here." "We won't," George said, eyes fixed ahead. "But we have to make it to shore first." The boat glided across the lake, fragile and vulnerable under the heavy, watching mist. The shore felt impossibly far, each stroke of the oars heavy and slow. George's arms burned, sweat mixing with the cold spray on his skin. Behind them, the mist swirled, thickening as if alive, trying to pull them back. Alex glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Do you think it'll come back?" Caden swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the horizon. "It won't stop until it gets us." George gritted his teeth. "Then we can't stop either." A sudden splash to their right made them all flinch. The water rippled violently, but nothing surfaced. The lake held its secrets tightly. The boat bumped softly against the muddy shore. They scrambled out, dripping and exhausted. The forest here was different, older, wilder, and oddly silent. No birds. No wind. Just the sound of water dripping from leaves. They moved cautiously, knowing the creature could still be close. The path ahead was narrow and overgrown, leading deeper into the ancient woods. George led, I scanning every shadow. Alex kept a tight grip on his knife, while Caden carried what little gear remained. The sun dipped low, casting long fingers of orange and red across the sky. "We need shelter," George said quietly. "Somewhere we can rest before the next night." Caden nodded. "There's an old ranger station about a mile from here." They pushed forward, muscles aching and spirits frayed. The forest seemed to watch them, every rustle sending shivers down their spines. A sudden snap echoed nearby. They froze. Eyes searching the underbrush. But nothing moved. Only silence. Then a faint, dripping sound, slow and deliberate, like water falling from somewhere unseen. George swallowed. "It's still following." The ranger station appeared through the trees, a small wooden building weathered by time and neglect. Its windows were broken, and the door hung crooked on its hinges. Yet, it offered a semblance of shelter, a place to regroup. They stepped inside cautiously, the musty smell of decay greeting them. Dust settled thick on every surface, and spiderwebs hung in corners like ghostly curtains. Alex ran his fingers along a battered wooden table. "We can't stay long, but at least it's out of the elements." Caden found a rusted lantern and some old matches. "If this still works, it might keep whatever's out there at bay." George lit the lantern, and the soft glow pushed back the darkness, filling the room with a fragile warmth. Outside, the forest remained silent, but the sense of being watched didn't fade. They took turns keeping watch through the broken windows, eyes darting nervously to every shadow. The night stretched long and unforgiving. At some point in the night, George awoke to a low whispering sound just beyond the window. He sat up slowly, straining to listen. The voice was faint, almost hypnotic, a murmur carried on the wind, speaking words he couldn't understand. He nudged Alex awake. "Do you hear that?" Alex shook his head. "I don't want to." Caden sat up, eyes wide. "It's calling to us." George felt a chill crawl down his spine. The whisper grew louder, weaving through the broken window, filling the room with an eerie melody. It was then that the water outside began to ripple, small waves forming on a distant pond near the station. Something moved beneath the surface, slow, deliberate. George's heart hammered. The creature was still near. And it was waiting. The whispered voice lingered in the room like a ghost's breath, weaving through the stale air with a hypnotic pull. George found his eyes drawn to the broken window, the place where the chill seeped in. Alex clenched his fists. "We need to stop listening to it. It's trying to get inside our heads." Caden nodded slowly. "But how? We don't even know what it wants." George swallowed hard. "I think it wants us to come closer, to the water." A sudden splash outside startled them all, the sound sharp and wet. The lantern flickered. For a moment, the room felt alive with tension, as if the very walls were holding their breath. "Whatever it is," Alex said quietly, "it's patient. And it's waiting for something." The first light of dawn was a thin, pale strip along the horizon when the whispering finally ceased. The three men sat in tense silence, exhaustion weighing heavy on their limbs and minds. "We can't keep running," George said. "We need to end this." Alex looked doubtful. "How?" "We barely know what it is." Caden reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, weathered book he had found near the ranger station, a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. "I found this earlier," he said. "It's from a ranger who worked here years ago. He wrote about the creature, about how it came from the well and how to banish it." George leaned in, eyes scanning the faded handwriting. It spoke of ancient rituals, fire, and sacred water, a way to seal the creature back beneath the lake. "We have to try," George said firmly. "It's our only chance." The morning light filtered softly through the cracked windows, casting long shadows across the worn pages of the journal. George traced the faded script with his finger, reading aloud in a quiet, steady voice. "It says we need fire, not just any fire, but a fire blessed with salt and certain herbs, to purify the water and banish the creature back to the depths." Alex frowned. "Where do we find that stuff out here?" Caden shook his head slowly. "The journal mentions a cabin deep in the woods, where the ranger kept supplies. If it's still there, we might find what we need." George looked at both of them. "Then that's where we go. We don't have time to waste." They gathered their gear, hearts heavy but determined, and stepped out into the misty morning. The trek to the ranger's supply cabin was slow and treacherous. The forest was dense, shadows stretching like grasping hands as the sun climbed higher but failed to warm the air. Branches scraped their faces and snagged their clothes, every sound amplified in the oppressive quiet. After an hour, they spotted the cabin, nearly hidden by overgrowth and time. Its wooden walls were warped and stained, the door barely hanging on rusty hinges. George pushed it open with a creak. Inside, dust motes danced in the weak sunlight. Shelves lined the walls, empty but for a few jars of dried herbs and a small pile of salt. Caden's face lit with hope. "This is it." They quickly gathered the supplies, careful not to disturb the silence. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath. They knew the final confrontation was drawing near. With the herbs and salt bundled carefully, the three men moved swiftly back toward the lake, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. The forest seemed darker somehow, as if the trees themselves whispered warnings in a language only the mist could understand. George kept his eyes on the path, muscles tense. "We don't have much time. The creature will know we're preparing." Alex gripped his knife tighter. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes." Caden glanced back over his shoulder. The journal said the ritual must be done at the well. That's where the creature's power is strongest, and where it can be sealed. As they neared the lake's edge, the familiar coldness of the mist wrapped around them. The water was still and black, hiding the horrors beneath. George exhaled slowly. "Let's finish this." They reached the moss-covered well just as the sun began to dip behind the trees, painting the sky with streaks of deep orange and purple. The air was thick with anticipation. Caden began arranging the salt in a rough circle around the well's edge, sprinkling the dried herbs carefully within the ring. George gathered kindling and small branches, stacking them in the center. Alex struck a match, lighting the fire with shaking hands. The flames caught quickly, flickering bright against the encroaching darkness. A low growl echoed from beneath the water, vibrating through the stones. The surface rippled violently as the creature stirred, drawn by the flames and the scent of salt. George began reciting the words from the journal, voice steady but low. W. A tear of the cursed, fire of the pure. Seal the shadow, end the lure. The fire blazed higher, crackling fiercely as the mist thickened, swirling with unnatural energy. The creature's form rose from the well, towering and terrible, eyes glowing with fury. The battle between light and darkness had begun. The creature screamed, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. Its elongated limbs flailed as it lunged toward the fire, the circle of salt glowing faintly in the growing darkness. George stood firm, chanting steadily, the words from the journal becoming a mantra. The flames danced wildly, casting strange shadows that twisted and writhed against the trees. Alex gripped his knife, ready to defend, but the creature recoiled from the fire's light, its glowing eyes burning with rage and pain. Caden threw handfuls of herbs into the flames, sending sparks into the mist. The air thickened with the scent of burning sage and salt, a sharp contrast to the cold, damp smell of the lake. The creature's thrashing slowed, its form flickering like a dying flame, caught between worlds. George's voice rose, steady and unwavering. by fire's light and water's deep. Back to darkness, now you creep. With a final, piercing howl, the creature's form shattered like mist under sunlight. It collapsed back into the well, the water calming instantly, returning to its black, still surface. The fire burned low, the mist receding like a tide pulling away. Alex exhaled, shaking with relief. Is it over? Caden nodded slowly. For now. The curse is sealed. George stared into the well, watching the ripples fade. We bought ourselves time, but the lake will never be the same. They stood silently, the weight of what had happened settling on their shoulders. The forest seemed quieter now, waiting, watching, but no longer threatening. As they made their way back to the ranger station, the first stars appeared overhead. A fragile peace had returned. But the lake held its secrets still. The walk back to the ranger station was quiet, each step heavy with exhaustion and relief. The forest no longer felt hostile, instead, it was eerily peaceful, as if the very trees were sighing after a long-held breath. George glanced at his friends. Alex's face was pale but calm, and Caden walked with a thoughtful look, as if trying to understand everything that had happened. We did it, Alex finally said, breaking the silence. We stopped it. Caden shook his head slowly. Maybe. But things like this, they never really end. George nodded. The lake will always be a part of this. A part of us now. They reached the ranger station and settled inside, the weak lantern light casting long shadows on the walls. For the first time in days, they allowed themselves to rest. As night fell, George lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. The memories of the creature's glowing eyes and the cold depths of the well haunted his thoughts. He wondered what had trapped it there in the first place. And if someday, the curse might awaken again. Outside, the wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying the faint sound of water dripping. George closed his eyes, trying to hold onto the fragile peace they'd earned. But deep beneath the lake, something stirred. Waiting. Watching. The next morning, the sun filtered softly through the broken glass of the ranger station. George, Alex, and Caden gathered their things, preparing to leave the haunting woods behind. As they stepped outside, the lake stretched out before them, calm and still under the pale light. For a moment, it looked almost peaceful. But George couldn't shake the feeling that beneath the surface, something waited, patient and silent. Alex tried to break the tension with a weak smile. Maybe we should come back with fishing poles next time. Caden gave a dry laugh. Yeah, if we want to get eaten. George forced a smile but didn't respond. They began their trek back to civilization, each step carrying them farther from the nightmare. The forest seemed less oppressive now, birdsong returning softly to the air. The mist had lifted, revealing sun-dappled leaves and the gentle ripple of the lake's edge. Still, the memories clung to them like shadows. As they reached the main road, George paused and looked back. The lake shimmered quietly in the distance, hiding its secrets beneath the surface. He whispered to himself, "It's not over." Not really. Alex and Caden fell silent beside him, sharing the same unspoken fear. They knew that some stories never truly end. And some creatures never truly disappear. Days passed, and life slowly returned to normal for George, Alex, and Caden. But the haunting memories lingered like a shadow over their minds. George found himself waking in the early hours, heart racing, ears straining for sounds that weren't there. One evening, while sitting quietly, he noticed the faint sound of dripping water, almost like a whisper calling from a distance. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. But deep inside, he knew the creature's presence was not gone forever. Alex tried to focus on everyday life, but the image of those glowing eyes haunted him. He kept checking over his shoulder, expecting to see the creature lurking in shadows. Caden, usually the calmest of the three, grew